Hello world, today I want to share a coding problem that I'm preparing for a technical interview. It's the 165 of LeetCode called compare version numbers. This one is asking you to compare version 1 and version 2, usually very familiar format as we see in a lot of packages, coding packages, 1.1, 1.2.1. And the one says if the first version is newer, like it's a higher version, return 1. If the second version is newer, return -1. And if there are the same version, equals to 0. So first of all, it tells you that this is formed with, first it's a number, and then all these numbers are separated with dots. But the dot, it tells you it's a notation. It does not mean, 2.5 is halfway through 3. It's just like 2 is the higher hierarchy, and 5 is just kind of the fifth iteration under that hierarchy. But it doesn't mean it's like, it could go on and on. It could go 2.5, 2.7. Python is jumping from 2.7.14 to, now it's even 3.6.3. So please keep in mind there are many good solutions online and many different ways to solve the same problem. My solution is just one way to show you one approach, and by no means it's the best optimized. These kind of videos are for me to crystallize my knowledge, and seriously, after doing this exercise, you realize how far you have to go to be a coder. So first of all, we want to process the version a little bit. I want to say, so if, imagine my version 1, equals to version 2, I can say if everything's equal, just so sure, everything looks the same. Copy this over just in case. I can return 0, but that's just a edge case. Likely that's not going to happen. Because these version numbers are separated by dots, we want to split them. One way to do it is to split them by dots, right? So I can have v1 list. I like to append the type here to keep track of what I'm doing. So this is Python's way to split by dot. And I also saw that most of the solutions are in Java and C, and that is awesome. I wish I can spin out the C++ or Java solution. So there's not a whole lot of solution in Python, so I'm glad to kind of just show, and if you have suggestions, please definitely comment below. So okay, we did the split, and now we have to think about this, right? Really, for the version, do we really have to check every single one? Not so much, actually. If the first version is really the most significant, right? Python, whatever, 2. Blah, 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 is the older version compared to Python 3. So 3. Dot, whatever, no matter how many dots, if it's version 3, it's automatically newer. So we can return if the, it's this input, we can say -1, because if this input is newer than this one, it's -1. You return -1. So really, we want to start checking from the first most digit. So we can say for I in range length. But when you're doing here, it's like, what kind of length do you use? This should start to immediately ring a bell that when you're working with two lists, it's very likely that two lists are different length. You have to take into account that scenario. Usually, you can swap them. But in this, you want to return the right version. The order matters. You're going to end up swapping back and forth. It's easy to lose it. So what might be worth it is to measure the max length now. So you know how many digits you're comparing. And so I will iterate through the max length. So that makes my life easier. But when I'm starting to iterate max length on a smaller list, I should know that I will run out at some point, right? So I want to say if, so kind of v1 int, as I said earlier, I'm appending the type at the end to remind me, equals to int, just in case, you're taking, I will explain just a second. Okay. But this is not done yet, right? Why do we say int this? Index. It might be, you might get this. Sometimes you have 0.01. And we want to still be able to say this is, actually that would have been a better thing to ask your interviewer if there could be more digits on the right of a dot. So can you have 0.01? So usually that's not the case. So we want to take out the extra zeros. If, let's say, we're comparing this version with this version. In this particular exercise, the test cases are set in such a way that these two are equal. So there's a lot of times you see in LeetCode, it says you can safely ignore the leading 0. I don't see anything about 0 here right away. So I think, yeah, just in case. So it just because I did this exercise, I know, otherwise I would probably forget to append this. We can give it a try. And remember, this is only if the current index is smaller than the length of our list, right? Otherwise, than this list. Otherwise, we'll get a kind of out of range error. So that happens very frequently. If you're using Python for your interview, if you're working with matrix, out of range is a very commonly seen error. And the pattern to fix it is really to constantly check in your while loop and keeping the I and j inside your length boundary. Else 0. So this is basically a one-liner if statement, right? So I'm saying return this value if this is greater than 0, or this is the index is within boundary, or else return 0. So this is sort of like a ternary operator in Python. And v2 int equals to int v2 list the current index I, only if I is smaller than my length of v2 list, else also give me 1. And remember, we just have to start to compare with the most significant digit. If they're equal, we might have to check next, right? And if there's no next, we can, if everything's done, we checked everything, we can just return 0. That means they're equal. If nothing here, earlier returned, right? So if v1 int greater than v2 int, so remember, if we have to return the version, this is not our version number, right? This is just, we're slicing the version 1 digit at a time. Remember, if the first version is greater than the second version, we just have to return 1. And it's not else, because it could be equal, and we have to keep checking. Else if v1 int smaller than v2 int, then, so usually this is something worth checking. Sometimes when you're writing in interview, it's very easy to just kind of, I think you did that, but didn't. So reading it out loud helps. Okay, so now in the real interview, if you're coding by yourself, you'll be done by now. In the real interview, it's really important to iterate through your logic again, right? So if early on we know everything's equal, great, I can just return 0. But at the very end, if only else nothing goes wrong, then I can return 0 here. This is a very encompassing case. It says when nothing else, always return 0. When you have a line like this, you really want to check the logic in between, because otherwise it's always going to return 0. So I have processed the data a little bit, and I was able to measure max length. But because I'm using the max length rather than the actual length, I need to check if the index I, so it's not ij because I only have I here, the index I always lies within the boundary of my list, or else I give it a placeholder, right? And the current condition, I think that's good. So in LeetCode, you can usually run your code, just make sure nothing went wrong. And it's running a little slow, which is kind of weird. Okay, so it says your input is 1 and 0. So compare version 1 and 0. So the first one is newer, it's a higher digit, so you return 1. And LeetCode sometimes just only evaluate the edge case when you run, only until you submit the solution, and it gives you this. So we're lucky to kind of go through this right first try. But let me show you, what if you didn't, right? What if there's a issue you saw that you really want to solve? So first of all, let me say I'm going to try this, right? I'm going to show you what happens when you don't handle out of bound. So first of all, of course, you get an error, right? It says index error, list index out of range. So generally, you need to check for index error for sure. So it's saying the first one ran out, basically. So if I say if I length smaller than length of v1 list, so basically I uncomment this one, and I uncomment this one, right? So imagine now we're not just out of range. We actually forgot to turn everything into an int. What kind of things will we see? See here, I really want to say this, that's the error I found earlier. If I didn't try this and get a wrong answer, I would never be able to find it, right? So they want to say 0, 1, and 1 without any preceding dots are really equal. So basically, if there's a new version, it just increment, if there's a high level version, it just increment that high level digit by 1. If there's a lower level increment, like after say Python 2 started, everything is only a release within the Python 2, not a brand new one. It just Python 2.1. And if it has sub hierarchy, is Python 2.1.1. So there's not a Python 2.01, 02, 03. So basically, that is something just happened to be a setup, and you can clarify this with your interviewer too. So basically, it's more important, I think, the key is to always think about what kind of type of data you're getting, and kind of keep track of it throughout. And my tip is to append the type as the name of the variable. You can explain to your interviewer you're trying to be a little verbose, but you're really trying to, you're doing data processing, and you're trying to show people what you've done. And I think that can be very valuable in a field like machine learning. If you're doing a lot of data manipulation, you don't really want to change the input directly, so you're always creating copies of things. But the trade-off is obviously the time and space, right? Especially space in this case. The trade-off is really space. You're creating copies of your data, and when your data started to get really large, it started to become impossible. So a lot of questions require you to do it in place. But if it's a version number, we can safely assume that it's never going to get very long. So we can argue that our approach is quite okay for practical reasons. And so simple implementation is pretty clear. We just do a quick check. And in terms of n and the time complexity, so I'm not very good at like always figuring out time complexity. But my tip is like, really look at your code, slow down, right? How many times did you go through your data? So you have two data, right? You really have like kind of, usually you have two lists. You can say it's a m plus n, right, rather than just n, because you're going through two lists. But then you're just going through kind of two lists simultaneously once. So they're going to be one list, they're either equal length or one list is larger. So you can really say it's still crystallized to big O of n, and n being the larger list, the length of the larger list. And you're just really checking two elements of n or a subset of n at the same time, but you're not checking you're not checking element wise, right? One versus many. You're just checking one versus one. So essentially it's like 2n bound by 2n, and that's simplified to big O of n. So all my tutorials are quite verbose because they're really beginner friendly. I'm a beginner, so I hope it helps somebody. If it did help you, please comment below and share your expertise with me. And because I'm a beginner, you're likely going to see things that I just explained poorly. And if that is my apologies, first of all, but please give me comments below and help me improve as an engineer. Thank you so much.